Canadian-born J. Marshall Craig is best known for his critically acclaimed work as writer for Eric Burdon's Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, and has been publicised in half a dozen languages all over the world. J. Marshall Craig divides his time between writing and directing music videos and feature films, and is working on several new projects. First of all, greetings.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Pleasure. Now, you're a Monty Python fan and an investor in Monty Python. Tell us about this.
Well, I am indeed, actually. A partner in my film company is an English-born director by the name of Michael Milam. And Michael was very close to Peter Cook and Graham Chapman. So by default, we inherited a couple of unproduced Monty Python scripts and Peter Cook's last feature film, which indeed he passed away before he finished it. So I finished writing that, and at some point in the future, I hope we can get those to screen.
So do you have a really warped sense of humour?
I like to think so, yes.
Like the Knights who go, nee?
Yes, exactly.
This is not the place for an argument?
Yes, and the Trojan horse throwing the cows over the castle wall, all of that. Yes, exactly.
Okay, what made you become a writer, an author?
It's funny, I always wrote, even at the age, I read very young. And then I started to actually create my own little books, with crayons and Bristol board, and my mother would bind them with knitting wool, and she still has them. So I started young, and in my early teens, of course, Mom and Dad wanted me to get a summer job, and I, for 2 days, pumped gas. Which I found infuriating because I could never get the smell of gasoline off my fingers.
Oh, I love the smell of it. It's wonderful.
But it drove me crazy, so it was almost by default I got a job as a reporter. And so I did that all the way through high school, and I just went from there.
Do you have any authors that inspired you to get to that stage?
Oh, Truman Capote.
Yep.
Yeah,
Why?
Absolutely, Truman Capote. In Cold Blood, what he did with that. And then, of course, Norman Mailer. It's the mid-century American writers really got me. And there's a Canadian author by the name of Robertson Davies, who's most likely famous worldwide for his novel Fifth Business. And I met him on several occasions in my youth, and I was captivated, and always have been. Yeah.
Eric Burdon, a rock icon.
Yeah.
And he's lived through all the ups and downs of the industry. Yeah, the whole kit and caboodle.
Well, like no one else, actually.
That's right.
Yeah.
What was some of the things that stood out about Eric Burdon that were just amazing to you with your research?
Well, of course, the stories about Jimi Hendrix. I mean, we've got an entire chapter in that book on Jimi, because Jimi and Eric were... ultimately, they were best friends, and so the stories about Jimi, not necessarily Jimi on stage, as he was, at Monterey. Jimi's big coming out, and of course Eric played Monterey, and debuted the New Animals, and then of course after Eric wrote and recorded the song Monterey, it wasn't actually those stories. There were smaller stories just about literally having tea with Jimi Hendrix at a garden party in London, and appearing at it was called the Newport Pop Festival in 1969, I believe, at Playing Field here in Los Angeles. And Jimi played and asked Eric to get up on stage with him. And it was these small stories that really intrigued me. But in doing the research for the book, we had multiple versions of source material, both tape-recorded, videotaped, things that I would journal interacting with Eric, and things that Eric would journal himself on the road. And what I found fascinating and actually made it easy for me to write was that Eric was entirely candid. I mean, and our only contention with the book was at times I asserted that he was being too candid. He was telling everything, down to how badly Eric and the Animals were ripped off in the 1960s, because they literally lost all the money. The Animals, the original Animals did. But of course, Eric's prolific drug use, which he is actually proud of. I had to talk him into taking some of the stories out of the book. I simply said, and he finally put his foot down with one LSD trip, which is prominent in the book. So I'm not giving away anything here. He insisted that one should be in the book. But the other thing about Eric is he has been he's sort of a rock and roll zealot. He was in these amazing points in time with Jimi Hendrix. He was with John Lennon the night John Lennon met his father for the first time, the Scotch of St. James in London, But not just that. Stories. Eric was fascinated by, indeed still is, by Lawrence of Arabia. And at one point, Eric was down in the Middle East, and he hired an ex-Mossad agent to take him by jeep out in the Jordanian desert because he just wanted to, in his own way, relive some of that. And some of these stories are just so wild. I thought, okay, sometimes he had this whole story about this American bomber losing a nuke off the coast of Spain. And that he was there, and they had to bring in hazmat and all this, and I just thought, no, this is getting a bit carried away. This is, and I looked it up, and about 2 years prior to me writing the book, they had declassified all this, and Eric had every detail right, and it was from then on I was like, okay, I surrender. I believe everything you're telling me.
But why Lawrence of Arabia?
Eric is he's a troubadour. I mean, he is a singer, a writer, but he's ultimately he's a man of adventure in every sense, and I think it's what led him to become, I guess, ultimately part of the original British invasion with the Stones and the Beatles and the Who, was to go out and grab the world by the neck. And
isn't it amazing? A couple have fallen off the perch, as we would say, but most of the people, the performers that lived through that time, they should not be here, and they are.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are now eating health food and granola bars and leading a very healthy life.
Yeah, and indeed it's the same case with Eric. He lives very healthily now and works out, and so which is why he's still on the road many months of the year.
I mean, you could have been his cook on the road, because you love cooking, don't you?
Well, and actually it made the book easier to write, because Eric very often, I think even sometimes when he didn't want to write, he'd be, well, no, I'll come over, Jeff. I'll just, do that poached salmon thing you do. And so we'd have a bit of wine, and I'd cook for him.
And on the subject of cooking, I mean, your next book, it's called Ghost Soup. It's an autobiographical historical murder mystery cookbook.
Yes.
Do they actually eat the victims?
Well, I just like to say that I'm biting off more than I can chew, I think, with that project. Actually, my first published book was a cookbook I called Playing with My Food. And I began to embark on writing a sequel, which I wanted to call Eating My Words. And as I was assembling my recipes and cooking tips and things, I started to have stories that identified with when I learned that recipe or found that cooking tip, and it always had to do with me living in a different city in Canada, or visiting London or Hong Kong, or all the time I've spent in America. There was a story behind it, so I'd start to write the story behind it, and then it became the recipe was just an addendum, and the more research I did into ingredients and things, I got quite carried away. I found all this historical stuff, and then I thought, no, I'll actually put myself into it. I'll become the protagonist in the cookbook, and in doing so, I needed an antagonist. So I came up with a ghost to teach me how to cook, and it just goes from there. But it's very historical, and people who've read segments have really liked it. And actually, indeed, my agent has been bugging me for a long time to finish it and get it out.
Though. That actually is always good. It's encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah. So I will finish it at some point this year.
When you do a book, you've got all sorts of notches on your belt now, because you've done so many different subjects.
Yeah.
How do you choose a subject? How do you choose a theme?
This is cliche, but I think it's true. I think the subject chooses me in the moment. Again, the novel's been delayed for a few months because I'm just starting to work with Rolling Stones keyboardist Chuck Leavell on a new book, which is called Smart, Strong, and Sustainable. And this is a non-fiction book about hybrid fuels and the environment and reforestation and that's exciting in this time, especially the challenge of being environmentally friendly in this economic climate internationally. That's a real challenge. And so this is a non-fiction book, not about the music or the movie business or celebrity. So I'm learning a great deal. And this is a fast write, and this will be out, likely in a few months. But again, delaying me from finishing the novel.
So is Chuck Leavell an environmentalist?
Yes, actually, it's not widely known, but for many years now, Chuck has lived on a large plantation in southern Georgia, and he's an acclaimed forester. And in fact, Chuck is regarded as an expert and has testified before Congress about that, and was very involved in some legislative leaps forward here in America. So now Chuck is an expert. So. And
you have a great love for the music industry too, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, always have.
Are you a frustrated musician? Would you like to have been the front guy with the Rolling Stones?
No, I never be a front man, but I do play guitar, and
you could be one of the side men.
Sort of a Jeff Richards, I think, is sort of the.
So you are a guitarist?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
A good one?
Not terribly.
Would you have preferred to be a musician or than a writer?
Well, in the fantasy, of course, but I could never not be a writer. It's one of those things. I was born to do it, and I can't help but write. So I'm resigned to it.
And you're also doing a lot of music videos.
Indeed, I did Eric Burdon's last 3 music videos, and I recently did some video work with Chuck Leavell, and I've found myself ensconced in the hip hop world here in Los Angeles. The most recent book, actually, I finished, is another celebrity memoir with Damien DeMizza Young, a hip hop producer, most famous for work with Mariah Carey and Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre.
So, what do you prefer? Do you prefer music or writing?
I can't really separate them because, and even music, I find, is a form of storytelling, and even classical or jazz. I find it all, in one way or another, it's informing me. So, yeah.
What makes a good book?
I think mystery.
And what makes a good music video then? Not mystery. Is it just being as left field as possible without losing it?
Well, I think...
Because you had a guy with a camera on his shoulder dancing in your last video.
Basically, yeah. I had 3 cameramen sort of moving in time with the music to be a part of conveying the story, that it was being conveyed by the music. I think one of the keys with music videos is to be careful not to be literal, like to have your imagery follow the lyric, say. I think that's a mistake.
Where to after these next 2 projects?
Well, I have been working with Australian film director Frank Housen on his next feature, Remembering Nigel. I've known Frank for many years. We kind of lost touch for a while, and when he came to America to complete the film, we hooked up again. So I may end up on the cutting room floor, but he was kind enough to actually give me a cameo in the film.
Okay, you're amongst a group of friends, which you are anyway, but imagine the last 20 or 30 years, everybody's around you and they're all looking at you going, we want to know one thing, being an author, being a great cook, being a musical director and all that sort of thing, so you'll be able to illuminate yourself in one word. What would that be?
One word. Confused.
I love it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike.